1 year ago, he could barely stand. Today he moves like time never touched him. The footage does not linger long, yet it is enough. 2 images, placed side by side. The first shows a man who appears exhausted by his own body. His shoulders sag. His movements are hesitant. His eyes carry the dull weight of age, illness, and resignation. The second image is almost uncomfortable to watch. The same man stands upright. His posture is firm. His face appears fuller, calmer, strangely composed. It is not simply recovery. It feels like reversal. Across social media, the comparison spreads quickly. People replay it at night on small glowing screens, pausing and rewinding as if repetition might make the transformation easier to accept. Some call it modern medicine. Others call it discipline, wealth, access. Yet many remain silent, unsettled by something they cannot name. The change looks vibrant, but it does not look natural. We are not watching a miracle. We are watching a contradiction. Only months earlier, the man had spoken openly about fatigue and decline. He described the limits of age with quiet honesty. There was no drama in his words, no hint of a comeback. Then he disappeared from view. No updates. No explanations. And when he returned, it was not with an announcement, but with a presence that demanded attention. His voice was stronger. His movements were lighter. Most unsettling of all were his eyes. They no longer reflected weariness. They reflected something closer to youth, almost delicate, as though the clock inside him had been reset. The internet responded the way it always does. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Comment sections filled with speculation, comparisons, rumors. Some viewers noticed others changing as well. A man once confined to a wheelchair now walked freely. A woman in her 60s climbed a mountain and smiled calmly into the camera. Each case alone might have passed without notice. Together, they formed a pattern. Patterns invite interpretation. Interpretation invites fear. At first, the explanations remained safe. Advanced medical care. Private rehabilitation. Experimental but legal therapies available only to those who could afford them. These answers offered comfort, but they failed to address the most troubling detail. The speed. Bodies that had appeared fragile for years did not recover gradually. They transformed, almost abruptly. When change happens too quickly, people begin to ask different questions. Not how it was done, but at what cost. We begin to hear whispers about treatments that do not appear in official press releases, about substances derived, refined, and transferred, about processes that exist quietly within legal frameworks shielded by complexity and money. Nothing confirmed, nothing proven. Only fragments repeated often enough to feel familiar. We should be careful here. Rumors are not evidence. Speculation is not truth. But discomfort does not arise without reason. It arises when what we see no longer aligns with what we believe is possible. Tonight we are not here to accuse. We are here to observe, to slow down the images that others scroll past, to examine what happens when aging appears optional and when renewal seems reserved for a select few. Because the moment time appears to move backward for some, it inevitably begins moving forward for others. And that is where this story truly begins. When the body changes, it leaves evidence behind. Not explanations, but signals. Posture. Breath. Rhythm. The way a person occupies space. These details are difficult to fake, and even harder to synchronize across multiple individuals without drawing attention. In the months following the first transformation, viewers began to notice others. A man long associated with pain and limited mobility appeared on camera without assistance. He stood. He walked. He even moved with a confidence that had been absent for years. The footage was brief, but the effect was immediate. Comment sections filled with disbelief. Some praised resilience. Others felt unease. Recovery, they argued, rarely looks this complete. Soon after, a woman in her mid-60s shared images from a mountain trail. The climb itself was not extraordinary. What drew attention was her composure. No visible strain, no labored breath. She spoke calmly about life, about age, about acceptance. Yet the camera betrayed something else. Her skin appeared firmer. Her gaze was steady. She did not look like someone recently reclaimed from illness. She looked like someone whose body had been rewritten. Individually, these moments could be dismissed. Health fluctuates. People heal. Medicine advances. But together, they formed a sequence that refused to stay contained. Online users began assembling timelines, screenshots, side-by-side comparisons. The same faces, separated by months, sometimes weeks. Decline, followed by sudden renewal. At this stage, the discussion remained cautious. Doctors were quoted. Articles about anti-aging research resurfaced. Plasma therapies, regenerative medicine, cellular repair. These were real fields with real studies and real limitations. Most required time, gradual improvement, careful monitoring. What people were seeing did not follow that pattern. We should pause here. Observations are not conclusions. But patterns demand attention, especially when they repeat. The next phase of this conversation did not emerge from official sources. It surfaced in private posts, comments buried beneath unrelated videos, fragmented claims that spread quietly before becoming impossible to ignore. The language was inconsistent, but the theme was the same. Blood, not blood in the symbolic sense. Not metaphor. Actual biological material. Components extracted, refined, and reintroduced into aging bodies. Supporters of the idea pointed to legitimate research on plasma proteins and their effects on inflammation and tissue repair. Critics noted that such research remained experimental, limited, and tightly regulated. The problem was not whether blood-based therapies existed. They did. The problem was the scale and speed implied by the rumors. According to these accounts, the treatments were expensive, beyond imagination. Not thousands, millions. The kind of cost that immediately excludes the vast majority of people. The kind of cost that does not merely buy medicine, but access. Discretion. Silence. Some posts claimed legality. Others claimed patents. A few insisted the procedures were taxable, documented, and approved within narrow frameworks. Each claim contradicted the next, yet all pointed in the same direction. Something was happening, and it was not designed for public visibility. As the discussion grew darker, so did the questions. Where does the material come from? How is it sourced? Who oversees the chain from extraction to treatment? Official answers were absent and speculation rushed to fill the void. Here, the story could have ended as another cycle of internet paranoia. But it did not. Because around the same time, a separate anxiety began surfacing across platforms. Reports of missing people. At first they appeared unrelated. A post about a disappearance here. A comment about an unresolved case there. Then users began placing these topics side by side. We are not suggesting causation. No credible evidence links these phenomena directly. But perception does not operate on evidence alone. It operates on proximity, on timing, on silence. People noticed that discussions about youth and vitality were unfolding alongside conversations about absence, about individuals who simply stopped appearing, about families searching without answers, about a surveillance infrastructure so vast that disappearance itself felt implausible. This is where fear changes shape. It is no longer focused on celebrities or medicine. It shifts inward, toward the ordinary, toward vulnerability, toward the idea that systems designed to protect can also obscure. Experts weighed in cautiously. They warned against conflating unrelated issues. They reminded audiences that online statistics are often incomplete or misleading, that rumors thrive where transparency is lacking. All of this was true, and yet reassurance struggled to land. Because fear does not ask for proof. It asks for coherence. When a society sees bodies becoming younger and others becoming invisible, even coincidence begins to feel charged. The human mind searches for structure, for explanation, for someone who understands what is happening behind closed doors. At this point, the narrative crosses an invisible threshold. It is no longer about whether a treatment works. It is about who benefits from it, and who does not. In the absence of clarity, people begin to imagine systems that operate beyond accountability. Markets that function quietly. Ethics that bend under profit. None of this is confirmed. But none of it feels impossible either. And that uncertainty is the most powerful force of all. Because once doubt takes hold, it does not remain contained. It spreads. It reshapes how people interpret every image, every headline, every transformation they see on screen. The body shows us change. Society decides what that change means. And somewhere between the two, trust begins to erode. If these transformations are not illusions, then the real mystery is not how they happen, but why so few are allowed to ask questions. Every era has its promise of longevity. Ancient elixirs, forbidden herbs, modern pills. What changes is not the desire to live longer, but the language used to justify it. Today, that language is scientific, technical, clean enough to sound reassuring. At the center of the current discussion lies a simple claim. The human body, when exposed to certain biological components found in younger blood, may respond by repairing itself more efficiently. Inflammation decreases. Cellular stress lessens. Tissue appears to recover faster. These ideas are not invented. They exist in peer-reviewed research, explored carefully in controlled environments. The conclusions, however, are cautious, limited, conditional. What the public conversation has seized upon is not the research itself, but a distorted reflection of it. Online narratives describe treatments that bypass time, procedures that compress years of recovery into weeks. According to these claims, youthful biological material is extracted, refined, concentrated, and then reintroduced into aging bodies. Not as a transfusion in the traditional sense, but as a targeted intervention. Precision medicine, they call it. The first question is always legality. Supporters insist these procedures operate within regulatory frameworks. Licensed pharmaceutical companies. Taxable transactions. Patents filed and approved. Each assertion is designed to neutralize concern. If it is legal, it must be safe. If it is documented, it must be ethical. History suggests otherwise. Legality has never been a reliable measure of morality. It is only a measure of permission. As figures circulate, the scale becomes clearer. These treatments are not priced for improvement. They are priced for exclusion. Millions of yuan per session. Costs that transform healthcare into a luxury product. At that level, medicine stops being about healing and starts becoming about selection. Who receives the option to renew? Who does not? Those promoting the treatments emphasize choice, voluntary participation, willing donors, proper compensation. In theory, this framework appears balanced. In practice, it collapses under pressure. Because when demand concentrates at the top, supply inevitably searches downward. This is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable. Critics do not focus on celebrities. They focus on systems, on what happens when the human body enters a supply chain, on how quickly consent becomes ambiguous when financial disparity widens, on how oversight weakens once transactions are shielded by complexity and distance. None of this requires a conspiracy. It only requires incentives. Experts in bioethics have long warned about this threshold. The moment biological material acquires extraordinary market value, exploitation becomes a structural risk. Regulations cannot monitor every transaction. They cannot follow every intermediary. A single loophole is enough to transform a legal industry into something far darker. This is not speculation. It is precedent. Organ trafficking did not emerge from chaos. It emerged from demand. From wealth concentrated in few hands and desperation spread among many. Blood-based therapies, if mismanaged, carry the same vulnerability. Public fear does not arise from the idea of scientific progress. It arises from asymmetry. From the realization that some lives may become more valuable than others, not because of who they are, but because of what their bodies contain. As these concerns circulate, official responses remain minimal. Statements emphasize caution. Remind audiences that online claims are unverified. Encourage trust in institutions. But reassurance requires transparency, and transparency is precisely what feels absent. In the vacuum, speculation intensifies. People begin asking questions that extend beyond medicine. Questions about oversight, about accountability, about who audits industries that operate quietly at the intersection of health, profit, and power. Each unanswered question deepens suspicion. We must be precise here. There is no confirmed evidence that these treatments rely on illegal sourcing. No proof that disappearances are connected. No documentation tying individual transformations to systemic abuse. These facts matter, but so does perception. When institutions do not communicate clearly, people construct narratives that feel coherent, even if they are incomplete. They connect dots not because they want to believe something terrifying, but because uncertainty feels worse. The pursuit of extended life has always revealed the values of a society. Who it protects, who it prioritizes, who it is willing to overlook. In this moment, the fear is not that the rich might live longer. It is that the cost of that longevity may never be evenly distributed. Once the body becomes a commodity, the line between innovation and exploitation becomes dangerously thin. And once that line is crossed, it is rarely crossed alone. If the pursuit of youth creates demand powerful enough to reshape markets, the next question is not what science allows, but what society is willing to ignore. Fear rarely announces itself loudly. It arrives quietly, disguised as coincidence. A comment beneath a video. A question left unanswered. A name mentioned once, then again, then too often to ignore. As discussions about rejuvenation intensified, another conversation began unfolding in parallel. It did not originate from the same sources, nor did it follow the same trajectory. It appeared fragmented, dispersed across unrelated posts and platforms. Reports of missing people. At first isolated. A child here. A teenager there. An adult who never returned home. None of these stories carried enough weight alone to command national attention. Together they created unease. What unsettled people was not simply the number of disappearances, but the context in which they occurred. A society saturated with surveillance. Cameras embedded in streets, buildings, transportation systems. A network designed to observe movement, to record presence. In such an environment, disappearance should be an anomaly. Instead, it seemed persistent. We must be careful with language here. Reports vary. Numbers are disputed. Online statistics are often unreliable. Official explanations exist, though they are brief and procedural. Cases are categorized. Investigations are said to be ongoing. From an institutional perspective, nothing appears extraordinary. From a human perspective, everything does. Parents do not measure safety by official statements. They measure it by absence, by empty chairs, by unanswered messages. When these absences accumulate, even without evidence of connection, the mind searches for meaning. Online, some users began drawing lines where none had been proven. They juxtaposed timelines. They compared peaks in discussion. Youthful transformations appearing alongside stories of those who vanished. No data confirmed causation. No investigation supported linkage. Yet the proximity alone was enough to unsettle. We should state clearly, correlation is not proof. Speculation can mislead. These principles matter. But so does social psychology. When trust erodes, people stop asking whether something is true. They ask whether it feels plausible. And in a climate shaped by secrecy and imbalance, plausibility expands quickly. The role of institutions becomes critical at this stage. Transparency does not eliminate fear, but it contains it. Silence, however, magnifies everything. Each unanswered question becomes a canvas for imagination. Each delayed response feels deliberate. Experts attempted to intervene. Sociologists warned of moral panic. Analysts cautioned against conspiracy thinking. They emphasized structural explanations. Migration, data lag, misreporting. All reasonable points, all correct in isolation. None addressed the emotional core of the issue, because the fear was no longer about missing individuals. It was about invisibility, about the possibility that systems could function efficiently while people fell through unnoticed, about the idea that oversight does not guarantee protection. This is where narratives converge. The earlier question about rejuvenation was never truly about medicine. It was about access. Who could afford renewal? Who could bypass the limitations imposed on everyone else? When that same society begins to question where its most vulnerable members are, the contrast becomes difficult to ignore. We are not suggesting that one causes the other. We are observing how they coexist within the same mental space. One story speaks of extended life. The other speaks of unexplained absence. Together, they form a tension that demands resolution. Public discussions began shifting in tone. Less curiosity, more anxiety. Comments that once speculated about technology now asked about safety, about children, about oversight. The focus moved away from celebrities and toward the ordinary, toward families who lacked influence, resources, or visibility. At this point, the conversation ceased to be about truth or falsehood. It became about trust. Trust in systems that promise protection. Trust in institutions tasked with oversight. Trust that progress benefits everyone equally. Once that trust fractures, even benign developments appear threatening. There is no confirmed evidence of a hidden network harvesting youth. No verified documentation linking rejuvenation therapies to disappearances. These facts remain unchanged. What has changed is perception. Perception determines how societies respond to uncertainty. It shapes whether people accept official explanations or reject them outright. It influences whether fear becomes contained or spreads unchecked. When citizens begin to believe that answers are withheld, they assume the worst not because they desire chaos, but because uncertainty feels unsafe. In such moments, imagination fills gaps faster than evidence ever could. This is the danger zone. Not where crimes are proven, but where belief hardens without proof. Where fear becomes self-sustaining. Where every new image, every transformation, every absence reinforces an existing narrative. We should pause again. Step back. Acknowledge limits. Responsible inquiry demands restraint as much as skepticism. Yet restraint does not erase unease. It only frames it. What remains undeniable is this. When a society starts asking where its people are, the question itself signals distress. It suggests that the social contract, however subtly, has begun to strain. The pursuit of longevity did not create this fear, nor did reports of missing individuals alone. It is their coexistence, their overlap in time and attention, that unsettles. When life appears extendable for some and precarious for others, the imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. And once that imbalance is felt, it does not dissipate easily. When a society starts asking where its people are, the danger is no longer invisible. Every story reaches a point where speculation must stop and reflection begins. This is that point. We started with bodies that appeared to defy age. Images that suggested renewal where decline had once been accepted. At first, the questions felt harmless. Curiosity wrapped in admiration. The kind of fascination that accompanies any apparent breakthrough. But as the layers unfolded, the focus shifted. Away from individuals, away from medicine, toward something far less tangible and far more consequential. Trust. No credible investigation has confirmed that rejuvenation treatments rely on exploitation. No verified evidence connects medical innovation to disappearances. These facts matter, and they must be stated clearly. Responsible inquiry depends on restraint. Without it, fear becomes distortion. Yet restraint does not erase unease. What remains troubling is not what has been proven, but what has not been explained. The silence surrounding access. The absence of transparency. The visible gap between those who benefit from progress and those who merely observe it from a distance. When life extension appears attainable only for a select few, society begins to question the fairness of the system that enables it. This is not a new dilemma. History is filled with moments where technology advanced faster than ethics could follow. Each time, the same pattern emerged. Innovation concentrated power. Power demanded discretion. Discretion bred suspicion. And suspicion left unaddressed transformed into fear. The modern pursuit of longevity is no different. It forces a fundamental question. Not whether humans should live longer, but under what conditions. Who decides which lives are worth extending? Who bears the unseen costs? And whether those costs are acknowledged at all. We must be careful not to confuse discomfort with guilt. Unease alone does not imply wrongdoing, but neither should it be dismissed. Societies ignore early signals at their own risk. When people begin to feel that systems operate beyond accountability, confidence erodes quickly. The parallel rise of stories about rejuvenation and absence has unsettled many, not because they are linked, but because they coexist within the same emotional landscape. One narrative speaks of abundance, the other of loss. Together, they highlight imbalance. And imbalance is the seed from which distrust grows. It is tempting to demand definitive answers, to insist on clear villains and clean conclusions. But reality rarely offers such resolution. What it offers instead are choices. Choices about transparency, about oversight, about whether progress is shared or hoarded. The question before us is no longer whether science can extend life. That debate is already underway. The question is whether society can do so without sacrificing its sense of fairness, its commitment to protection, and its responsibility to the vulnerable. Because when people begin to fear that some lives are valued more than others, the damage extends far beyond any single technology. It reshapes how individuals relate to institutions, how communities interpret change, how trust survives in an era of unequal access. We return, then, to where we began. Not to the images of renewal, but to the reaction they provoked. Unease. Doubt. A quiet question shared across countless screens late at night. Not how long the rich can live, but how much a society is willing to lose so they can